Welcome to The Debate. When a Geiger counter is exposed to just a catastrophic amount of radiation, it doesn't scream, it doesn't explode, it just breaks. The entire mechanism is entirely overwhelmed by the environment, and it silently displays a reading of 0.
Right. The environment just, it simply burns out its capacity to register anything at all.
Precisely. It becomes completely mechanically numb. And, well, when we look at the universe of Liu Cixin's Remembrance of Earth's Past, specifically at the character of Wenjie, I think we're looking at a human Geiger counter, one that was subjected to a lethal dose of societal radiation.
Yeah, I see where you're going with this.
So today we are diving into the absolute core of the Trisolarian crisis. We're asking, is Wenjie a monster? Is she a definitive villain whose, personal pain cannot possibly justify her risking all of humanity? Or is she the ultimate tragic victim, a living, breathing example of what happens when a society is relentlessly, systematically cruel to someone for far too long?
Look, if you look closely at the text of the three-body problem and the vast amount of analytical discourse surrounding her, you'll see this isn't just a plot question. It's really the foundational question of the whole narrative. Are we defined by what happens to us or by what we do in response?
Exactly. And we sit on opposite sides of that exact fault line. I look at Wenjie, and I see the inevitable, logical outcome of a world that methodically stripped a brilliant woman of her humanity. When she makes her fateful choice, she doesn't act out of, cartoonish malice. She acts out of a profound, engineered despair.
I hear the empathy in your position, I really do, but I fundamentally disagree with the conclusion. I don't deny the profound horror of her trauma. It is staggering. But trauma, no matter how severe, does not issue a blank check for omnicide.
But you have to look at...
She utilized her suffering as a psychological shield, allowing her to make cold, calculated, and murderous choices that doomed billions of innocent people.
But think about where her worldview was forged, though. It wasn't in a sterile laboratory. It was during the Cultural Revolution. She's a young woman who watches her father, the brilliant physicist Yi Zhitai, beaten to death on a public stage by 14-year-old Red Guards wielding belts with copper buckles.
It's horrific, yes.
And the defining horror isn't just the violence of strangers. Her own mother stands on that stage and betrays him. Later, as Wenjie walks home alone in shock, she hears her mother laughing maniacally out of a window. If that is your baseline for human nature, if the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones destroying you, how do you ever trust humanity to fix itself?
You don't. And look, if her story ended with her becoming a reclusive, bitter misanthrope, she would have my complete sympathy. But the distinction between victim and villain is the mechanism of her action.
Which was a response to that trauma.
Let's look at the actual moment of contact, all right? When she receives that first message from Trisolarius, it is not an invitation to join a galactic federation. It's an explicit, desperate warning from a Trisolarian pacifist. The message literally reads, "Do not answer. Do not answer. Do not answer."
Right, but...
It spells out unequivocally that if she responds, her world will be located, invaded, and conquered.
Which she views as a necessary intervention.
You cannot justify that intervention. She was told that answering meant doom. Despite knowing the exact consequences, she unilaterally made a choice for billions of innocent people. We are talking about children, entire continents of people who had absolutely nothing to do with the Red Guards or her suffering. Pressing that button crosses the line into active evil.
I think you're evaluating her actions using a framework she had already discarded. You have to understand why she answered. It wasn't just the trauma of her father's death. It was the intellectual architecture she built to survive it.
The architecture of betrayal, you mean?
Look at what happens to her in the labor camp in the Greater Khingan Mountains. She experiences this rare, fragile moment of intellectual connection with a journalist over Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring. She helps him transcribe a letter to the government. And what does he do?
He frames her.
He frames her for it to save his own skin. Then, in detention, a seemingly kind official pours a bucket of freezing water over her in the dead of an Inner Mongolian winter, simply because she refuses to bear false witness against your dead father.
All of which reinforces her distrust of authority. Certainly. I'm not arguing she had an easy life.
When it goes deeper than authority, it changes her biological understanding of us. Reading Silent Spring was the turning point. It taught her that humanity's destructive nature wasn't just a political anomaly of the Cultural Revolution. It was systemic.
So we're all just pests to her?
She realizes that humans are essentially a biological parasite. Whether it's capitalism or communism, we are fundamentally toxic to our environment and to each other. So when she gets that message from Trisolaris, she isn't acting out of malice. She is operating on a scientifically calculated, albeit tragically flawed, ideal that a civilization capable of achieving higher technology must inherently possess a higher moral standard.
See, I look at that exact same sequence of events and draw the opposite conclusion. You're framing her as a misguided idealist. But what is the actual motivation driving that finger onto the button?
Salvation.
Have you considered her later meeting with the aging Red Guards? Years after the Cultural Revolution, she tracks down the women who beat her father to death. She's looking for some kind of closure, perhaps an apology. Instead, she finds these women, like the thick-set woman who feels zero remorse. The women claim they were victims too, sent out into the wilderness, their youth ruined.
Which completely validates Wenjie's thesis that humanity cannot self-reflect.
No, it solidifies her desire for revenge. When she saw that society would never apologize to her, specifically, her belief in her apocalyptic betrayal was cemented. She wanted to punish a world that refused to validate her pain. It wasn't about saving humanity. It was about burning down the house because she was locked in the basement.
But framing it as revenge diminishes the sheer scale of her thought process. Let's use a medical analogy. Wenjie didn't view herself as an executioner, getting back at the people who hurt her. She viewed herself as a cosmic surgeon.
A surgeon?
Right. When she replied to Trisolaris, her exact message included the phrase, "Our civilization is no longer capable of solving its own problems. We need your force to intervene." She is diagnosing a terminal, gangrenous limb, and she is calling in a specialist to amputate it.
Hold on, she wasn't a surgeon. Surgeons operate with consent. Furthermore, a surgeon doesn't amputate the patient's head to cure a gangrenous toe.
And if you really want to lean into this surgeon analogy, let's look at who she actually cuts. Because she didn't just target the systemic illness.
I know where you're going with this.
On the cliff at Red Coast Base, she amputated the one healthy relationship in her entire life. The murder of Base Commissar Lazit Ching and her husband Yang Weining.
Exactly. Let's really look at the mechanics of this, because this is the line of no return. Yang Weining wasn't part of the mob that killed her father. He was her father's former student. He rescued her from that frozen prison cell when she was quite literally dying.
He did.
He brought her to Red Coast Base, giving her a scientific haven when she had nothing. He loved her, married her, and protected her, completely risking his own career to shelter her, problematic political background.
Nobody is denying that Yang Weining was an innocent, fundamentally good man.
Right. Yet, when Commissar Lei discovers her unauthorized transmission to Trisolaris, Wenjie realizes her secret is at risk, so she sabotages the grounding wire on the cliff's equipment. When Lei goes down the rope to fix it, her husband Yang goes down to help him.
It was a horrific situation.
And Wenjie, looking down at the only man who truly cared for her, takes a hacksaw and mercilessly cuts the rope. She lets her innocent husband fall to his death and frames it as a workplace accident. The victim became the ultimate victimizer. I mean, how can you classify someone who hacksaws a rope holding her own husband as anything other than a monster?
Look, anyone listening to this might think, okay, but she literally murdered her husband. And they're right to be horrified. It is undeniably the darkest moment of her arc. But we have to look at the impossible calculus she was staring at.
There is no calculus that justifies that.
You are evaluating her actions using standard interpersonal morality. But in that moment, Wenjie is forced to operate on a scale of extreme utilitarianism.
Utilitarianism is often just a polite word for rationalizing atrocity.
Perhaps, but look at the variables. Li Zicheng was a political opportunist. When he found the transmission, he explicitly told her he was going to pretend she had nothing to do with it. He was going to bury the reality of extraterrestrial contact to secure his own legacy.
True, he was corrupt.
In Yi Wenjie's mind, Trisolaris was the absolute only hope for the moral salvation of the human species. Li was going to jeopardize that connection.
Which makes Li a corrupt bureaucrat. It doesn't make Yang Weining's murder acceptable.
I'm not saying it's acceptable. I'm saying it's tragically coherent. When Yang climbed down that rope, she was faced with a horrifying binary choice. She could save her husband, thereby allowing Li to live, which means Li suppresses the Trisolarian intervention, effectively dooming the entire human race to its own systemic cruelty.
Or she could commit murder.
Well, she could sacrifice the man she loved to ensure the overarching salvation of the species. She traded 2 lives for the fate of billions.
That is a terrifying rationalization. She imposed a lethal experiment on a humanity that never asked for it, and she murdered the only person who loved her to keep the control group ignorant. And her sacrifice didn't stop at the cliff.
Well, no, it didn't, but
If she truly believed this was a tragic utilitarian necessity, she would have sent the message and retreated into silent grief. But she didn't. She went on to become the commander-in-chief of the Earth-Trisolaris Organization, the ETO.
a role she stepped into years later when she realized others shared her disillusionment.
She stood in a cafeteria surrounded by fanatics, raised her fist, and led them in chanting, "Eliminate human tyranny. The world belongs to Trisolaris." I mean, she built and legitimized a global terrorist organization.
Evans built it.
The ETO assassinated scientists. They caused global chaos. They operated under the ideology of pan-species communism, the idea that humans are no more valuable than a blade of grass or a beetle, and therefore our extermination is morally neutral. You cannot separate the leader of a terrorist death cult from the violence her cult perpetrates. By embracing her role as a spiritual leader of the ETO, she definitively embraced villainy.
I hear you, but you're flattening the internal nuance of the ETO. Ye Wenjie didn't build the organization from scratch, nor did she author pan-species communism. The billionaire Mike Evans did.
She was still at the top.
Evans was a man who lived in the mountains planting trees, who realized humans would invariably destroy all other life. Evans was the radical. He led the Adventists, the faction that wanted Trisolaris to wipe out humanity entirely. But she was still their commander-in-chief. Her presence gave Evans the mythical figurehead he needed to recruit.
She provided a unifying center of gravity, yes, but she actively tried to curb the Adventists' extreme violence. The text explicitly shows her holding tribunal meetings to stop Evans and his operative, Pan Han, from indiscriminately assassinating more scientists. Furthermore, she didn't know the full truth of the Trisolarian invasion.
Because Evans hid it from her.
Exactly. Evans deliberately intercepted the subsequent messages from Trisolaris. He hid the aliens' true malevolent intentions from her.
Are we really supposed to applaud her for wanting a slightly gentler alien conquest? We are supposed to recognize that she was acting on incomplete data. When she finally realizes what Trisolaris actually thinks of us, when she reads the intercepted messages and sees that they view us quite literally as bugs to be exterminated, she experiences profound regret.
Regret.
Her fundamental hypothesis was that a higher technological civilization would be a higher moral authority. When she sees the empirical evidence that she was wrong, what does she do?
Look, regret after the apocalypse has already been set in motion is a bit too late to earn the title of tragic victim.
But her regret translates into the most crucial action in the entire trilogy. This is the defining pivot of her character. Before she dies, she arranges a seemingly innocuous meeting with the sociologist Luo Ji at the grave of her daughter, Young Dong. During this brief conversation, she secretly passes him the 2 foundational axioms of cosmic sociology.
Right, the axioms that eventually form the dark forest theory.
Exactly. First, survival is the primary need of civilization. Second, civilization continuously grows and expands, but the total matter in the universe remains constant. She deduces why the universe is silent, and she hands humanity the exact tool they will need to establish deterrence against the Trisolarans.
But that doesn't undo the damage.
A true villain, someone driven by pure ego-driven malice, would have doubled down on her hatred when proven wrong. Yi Wenjie behaved like a scientist. The data changed, so she changed her conclusion, and she armed humanity for survival.
Passing a cryptic puzzle to a single random sociologist does not absolve you of inviting an alien armada to conquer the planet. The fact that Luo Ji manages to derive the dark force deterrence from her clues is a testament to his sheer brilliance, not her innocence. If she truly wanted to save humanity at that point, if she was truly repentant, why not broadcast the theory directly to the United Nations? Why the riddles at a gravesite?
Because she couldn't. This is where you have to look at the environment she was operating in. The SOFONs, the Trasolarian quantum supercomputers sent to Earth, were already here.
I know they were, but
They were unfolding into lower dimensions, monitoring every spoken word, every digital transmission on the planet. If Wenjie had gone to the UN or even spoken explicitly about deterrence, the SOFONs would have orchestrated Luo Ji's death instantly. Or they would have killed her before she could finish the sentence.
even so, she took an enormous gamble.
No, think about the mechanics of what she accomplished there. It's like trying to smuggle a weapon to a prisoner of war while the guards are staring right at you. She had to completely disassemble the weapon into pieces that didn't look like a weapon. She disguised the most dangerous knowledge in the universe, the reality of the dark forest, as a casual, whimsical academic musing about cosmic sociology. She slipped it right past the SOFONs. That is an act of profound, redemptive genius.
I will grant you that the gravesite conversation is a masterclass in tactical espionage. It is brilliant. But brilliance is not morality. Even if we accept that she acted heroically in that specific moment, we absolutely cannot ignore the staggering arrogance that put humanity in that position to begin with.
But her arrogance was a direct product of,
Let me finish this thought because this is crucial. She decided, based on her own incredibly traumatic but ultimately limited experience, that the entire human race was garbage. She ignored an explicit warning from an alien pacifist. She murdered her husband to cover her tracks, and she fostered a fifth column of traitors who sabotaged Earth's scientific advancement for decades.
All of which is terrible, yes.
We can trace every subsequent horror in the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy directly back to her finger on that transmission button in Red Coast Base. Suffering trauma does not grant you the moral authority to play God with the cosmos.
It doesn't grant moral authority. You're right. But it provides a profound psychological explanation, which brings us to the core of Liu Cixin's genius in writing this character. Wenjie forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that monsters are not born in a vacuum. They are manufactured by the cruelty of their environment.
When I look at the ledger of her life, the evidence points to Wenjie as a definitive villain. We can and we should hold space for the horrific abuse she suffered. Watching your father beaten to death by zealots, being betrayed by your mother, being tortured in the freezing cold, it is unimaginable pain.
Absolutely unimaginable.
But we must also hold her accountable for her choices. She bypassed explicit warnings of planetary doom because of her own hubris. She crossed the moral event horizon when she murdered Lei Ji-cheng and her innocent husband in cold blood, proving she had internalized the very murderous ends justify the means ideology she claimed to despise. And she spent her later years leading an extremist cult that viewed human extermination as a viable political goal. She is the definitive proof that being a victim of trauma does not excuse inflicting apocalyptic evil upon others.
And when I look at the totality of her life, I return to the humanity she was stripped of. Wenjie is the ultimate tragic victim. She is a brilliant woman whose soul was literally and metaphorically frozen by relentless societal betrayal, from the mob that murdered her father, to the mother who abandoned her, to the colleagues who framed her. Every time she reached out for human connection, her hand was cut off.
That doesn't mean you cut off the whole world's head.
She sought a desperate, idealistic cure for humanity's systemic cruelty, because the world taught her we could not cure ourselves. Yes, she made a catastrophic miscalculation, but she was not driven by petty, cartoonish evil. She was driven by a desperate hope for moral intervention. And crucially, once she realized her tragic error, she used her brilliant scientific mind to quietly arm humanity with the dark forest axioms, sneaking the weapon right past our invaders and giving us our only fighting chance.
Well, the friction between those two interpretations, between the engineered victim and the cosmic villain, is exactly what makes her one of the most compelling characters in modern science fiction. Is she the original sin of the Trisolaran crisis, or is she merely the inevitable, inescapable consequence of humanity's own historical sins coming home to roost?
It's a question the text refuses to answer easily, and there are layers upon layers of philosophical commentary on the human condition left to explore in the source material. We will leave it to you, the listener, to decide where the line between profound trauma and absolute evil truly lies. Remember the Geiger counter we talked about at the beginning? Maybe Ye Wenjie wasn't just a machine that broke and hit zero. Maybe she was a mirror, reflecting the exact amount of toxic radiation humanity had already pumped into the world, right back out into the dark forest of the universe.